The president is back in front of the Supreme Court begging for a bailout. Let's talk about it. Hi, I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this is The Breakdown. Bit new to the channel and new to all of you, so want to give you a quick introduction. I'm a former prosecutor, former ACLU deputy director, and currently at a university working on policy. But I'm all about civil rights, civil liberties, criminal justice, and all things politics. So let's talk about what is about to happen in front of the Supreme Court. So, the presidential administration asked the Supreme Court on Friday to allow it to use this rarely invoked wartime law to continue to deport Venezuelans and other immigrants with little to absolutely no due process. The Supreme Court was like, this is interesting, told the immigrant's attorney, basically the plaintiff's attorneys, to respond to the government's pleadings by tomorrow, April 1st. Be very interesting to see what they have to say. Now, this emergency application arrived at the court after a federal appeals court in Boston ruled to keep a temporary block on the deportations in place. Okay, let's talk about how we got here because nobody's supposed to be here. So, this dispute was set in motion in early February when Secretary of State Marco Rubio designated Tren de Aragua, a violent Venezuelan street gang, as a foreign terrorist organization. Then, on March 14th, the president signed an executive order invoking the act to be able to very quickly arrest and deport people identified by the administration as members of the gang. So, right off the top, you can tell that this is problematic. But let's dig into why this is so bad. So first off, let's talk about what the Alien Enemies Act is, because this is a 1798 law that this administration went back in the archives, blew the dust off of, and said, okay, let's use this to mass deport people. So the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 gives the U.S. president the power to detain or deport non-citizens from a hostile nation during times of declared war, or when the U.S. is under invasion or predatory incursion by a foreign government. What does that mean? Well, first of all, let's get one thing straight. Congress is the only one who can declare war. We are currently not at war because the Congress has not said so. So that's aspect number one. So the president, in normal times, is supposed to wait until Congress declares war and then can bring this act into play. Now, the Constitution, which is where all of these powers come from, let's start with that, but the Constitution basically defines an invasion as literally people are coming across the border with guns, attacking this country en masse, like a war, a literal invasion, right? Not people creeping in across the border, but literally a head-to-head invasion. That's traditionally how this was defined by the Constitution, as well as other statutes from back in the day, right? Now, the other aspect, this predatory incursion thing, the last time it was used was talking about like 1781, where you had the raid on Richmond led by the American traitor, Benedict Arnold. That's the last time anybody talked about a predatory incursion, but that was the mindset of how this was supposed to be used. So, interestingly, anti-immigrant proponents have been begging for a very non-literal reading of these interpretations, while ironically, usually folks on that side love to be like, the Constitution is the Constitution, it doesn't change, that's the way it is. Now they're like, no, we want a little bit more to be able to allow us to just throw people out of this country, right? So the way they want this read, the way they want to approach this whole thing is really at odds with centuries, like not even years, centuries of legislative, presidential, and judicial practice, all of which confirm that using the Alien Enemies Act is only for when we're actually at war, which we are not, because again, Congress did not declare that we are at war with anyone. So, the times that this act has been used in history, it's only been used 3 times. During the War of 1812, yep, we're going back that far, World War I, and World War II. Most notably, it was used to justify the internment of Japanese, German, and Italian immigrants during World War II, actions for which Congress, presidents, and the court have all apologized for. Because basically, the act allows for the president to target non-citizens based only on their country of birth or citizenship, without requiring any evidence of misconduct or a threat to national security. It does not distinguish between lawful permanent residents or other non-citizens, nor does it give any avenue for appeal for those people affected. So that's why this is an act that has to be used sparingly. And that's why there's so many provisions about this being only used in wartime. So this is the first time that anyone is trying to use this in a time when we're not at war. So the reason why everyone is really worried about this, and rightfully so, is because this act allows for huge deviations from due process and equal protection. And these are key rights that are baked into our Constitution and that apply to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're an immigrant, a citizen, a visitor, whatever. If you're on U.S. soil, the U.S. Constitution applies. And that gives you that protection. And so allowing actions against people just because of where they're from, who they are, their nationality, is all contrary to the Constitution, which is why this Alien Enemies Act is so incredibly problematic. It's really broad in its scope. It does not allow people to respond with evidence saying, listen, I'm not a gang member. For instance, there is a soccer player from Venezuela who is now in custody in El Salvador, despite the fact he has no connections to being in a gang. He literally has a tattoo on his arm that celebrates his favorite football club, Real Madrid, but just because it has a crown on it on top of a soccer ball, somehow this was used as evidence that he was part of a gang. Meanwhile, he had no criminal history in Venezuela. He came here seeking asylum because of the fact that he protested against the Venezuelan government, and he has no criminal history here in the United States. He had a hearing coming up on April 17th to be able to talk about his citizenship status and see if there's a pathway forward for him. So why is he getting deported when he's done nothing wrong? But again, this broad umbrella of the Alien Enemies Act allows for this to happen and allows for people literally to be snatched out of their beds in the middle of the night, put on a plane, sent to God knows where without a hearing, without a trial, and without any due process. Now, I know a lot of people may say, yeah, but these are all criminals, etc., etc. Listen, before you can be branded as a quote unquote criminal, what usually happens before that? You've had a trial. Right? And the people that are being deported, as we're learning bit by bit and by the stories of the people that have been harmed so far, they had no connection to criminal activity. They had done nothing in the United States other than if they had a visa, if they asked for asylum, if they were under temporary protected status, TPS. That was their citizenship status. They were not necessarily citizens, but they weren't necessarily undocumented from the perspective of they came here illegally and overstayed or something along those lines. So all of this that is supposedly targeted at criminals is ensnaring people that have no contact with the criminal justice system and not allowing them to be able to plead their case to be able to stay. And the other disturbing part about this is, how far does this go? We don't know. This is just getting started. When you have this slippery slope where you're just giving and expanding more and more powers, it lends itself to be able to have abuse. And that's what we saw in World War I and World War II, where you had people who were literally rounded up just because of the fact that their heritage is in alignment with people that are currently attacking the United States. Not because they've shown allegiance to, as again, talking about World War II, the Japanese folks that were living here and that were rounded up in internment camps in California and throughout the West and other areas of the country, their only quote unquote crime was being Japanese. Not that they swore allegiance and any kind of support to the Japanese in their quest to get more domination during World War II. No, they just happened to be Japanese, One thing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the other. So now we're not learning from the mistakes of the past. It looks like we're trying to repeat them. So let's see what the Supreme Court has to say. I'm very curious to see what the pleadings will say, especially when the plaintiffs write their response, and see what happens on this expedited hearing schedule. I'll be back with more. I'm Melba Pearson, also known as the Resident Legal Diva, and this was The Breakdown. Take care.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.